I really wanted to reach other queer and LGBT people across the country and across the globe who may not have access or exposure to some of the thoughts and ideas about sexuality and gender identity, and also the intersection of spirituality, whatever that is for them. And so the theme is conversations with artists, healers, and activists who support the LGBTQ community to feel more empowered and enlightened and enlivened.
This is Therapist Clubhouse, a podcast for private practice entrepreneurs. I'm Annie Schusler. This week, I'm talking to Nick Venegoni, a private practice entrepreneur in San Francisco. Listen as we dive into how he embraced his superpowers and created a branch of his business called Queer Healing Journeys. Welcome, Nick. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Annie.
So I wanted to talk to you because you have done two things incredibly well in your business, and I think of them as the most important things. You've really embraced your superpowers, meaning what you're great at, what sets you apart from other therapists, and the stuff that you're doing when you're at your absolute most effective. And then you've also really done a deep dive into identifying your right fit clients and understanding them, understanding their needs, and kind of taking a stand for them. So let's start. It's going to be interconnected because those things are so related for all of us and particularly for you. But let's start with talking about your superpowers. So you do some of what we might think of as more conventional therapy work, but you also do a lot of work that we would think of as alternative. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I guess a good place to start with that is that one of the branches of psychology and psychotherapy that I really embrace is transpersonal psychology, which is really about a more holistic and spiritual aspect of psychology. And, that was one of the emphases in the grad school that I went to, which was part of the reason I decided to go there.
Where'd you go?
I went to California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. Great. So being someone who grew up in a spiritual family, not hardcore religious, but spiritual, it was an important part of my life. And I explored a lot of different kinds of spirituality throughout my early adulthood from college and onward. And really found the different experiences that I had to be healing and transformational and wanted to be able to bring that work into the work that I do with my clients. And so I guess one of the things I'll say about transpersonal psychology that I learned in school is that it's more about a mindset that the therapist holds, and it doesn't always have to be something that you speak about or talk about, but just holding that in the container and allowing that to emerge with the client wherever they are. And I tend to attract a lot of clients who want to work more holistically and may not identify with a particular spiritual practice or religion, but, at minimum, identify as agnostic and at most have a pretty significant spiritual practice. And so I really enjoy being able to bring that resource that they have with them into the room to support them through the therapy practice. One of the branches of spirituality that I use a lot in my work is Buddhism. And I really like Buddhism because it's not really dogmatic, and I use more what people would call Buddhist psychology as opposed to Buddhism as a religion, because Buddhism has a lot of principles and practices and ideas that can be applied to psychology without having to buy into the belief of Buddhism or who the Buddha was themselves. And so two pieces from Buddhism that I really bring in a lot are compassion and equanimity. And for those who don't know, equanimity is being engaged and present without preference. So without pushing away, but without pulling towards. And we live in a world that feels so polarized a lot of the time. We're really used to the push or the pull, but not used to being able to be present without doing neither of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of it too as you know this, Nick, I just got back from a 3-day retreat recently where I was silent.
Mm-hmm.
I shut up for 3 days for the first time ever. And what sort of started coming to me was this idea of grasping, that there are different ways that my mind can be. And one of them is grasping, whether it's kind of grasping at the past, and sometimes that's entertaining, sometimes it's upsetting, sometimes it's wonderful, but it's still, it has this different feel of grasping, and then definitely looking toward the future, grasping of like, what's going to happen? I want that. I don't want that. And then starting to find this other place of now, of just not grasping.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being in now. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that tool is especially helpful for therapists, just as a therapist, to not have an agenda or an expectation about where our client is or what they're doing, or an attachment to them getting better, right? Like, one of the best pieces of advice I got from a supervisor when I was an intern was when I had a client who had a lot of trauma and had been in therapy for a really long time. And, you know, I was still a new therapist, and they were saying, I was saying I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to help them. And my supervisor said that sometimes the best thing that you can do as a therapist is not about helping the client get better, but not allowing them to get worse. Right. And so that really helped me to get that if I wasn't helping them better, at least I'm supporting them so they don't slide backwards. And for people who have a lot of depression or feel suicidal, that's a really important piece.
Yeah. It's a totally different way of thinking about our work. So tell me about, you have decided to do a podcast. And as this is airing, the podcast is in full swing. There are all these episodes out there in the world. So it's called the Queer Spirit. So tell us about the podcast, starting with what made you know that it was time to do this podcast.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to do the podcast is through doing my own work of just marketing my practice and hearing a lot about the best ways to put yourself out there is by providing fresh content. And a lot of people do that through blogging. And I have blogged in the past, and I probably continue to blog, but not very often and not regularly, even though people tell me that I'm a good writer. I don't have the discipline of a writer that a lot of other people do. You know, like my husband has a background in writing, and he can just sit and work a piece of writing for hours. And I don't have the patience or the interest in doing that. I just want to, you know, get my thoughts out there and then hit send or post, right? I'm not really into editing and refining. So based on marketing ideas, another way of putting out fresh content is through podcasting. And I really enjoy talking to people and hearing their stories. And so I thought that I would try that instead of blogging. And so that's what I decided to do. And also being inspired by people like you and a few other friends and colleagues who have started podcasting, it sounded really interesting and exciting. And I'm also not afraid of technology and learning new ways of doing that. And the fact that we can do something like this in our living room now and not have to have expensive equipment in a studio was cool. So yeah, that was part of how I decided to start that journey.
And tell us about the theme of the podcast and who it's for, and, you know, what kinds of conversations you're having.
Yeah, so I really wanted to reach other queer and LGBT people across the country and across the globe who may not have access or exposure to some of the thoughts and ideas about sexuality and gender identity. And also the intersection of spirituality, whatever that is for them, and So the theme is conversations with artists, healers, and activists who support the LGBTQ community to feel more empowered and enlightened and enlivened. And so I have been talking to people who are coaches and therapists. I've talked to authors. I've talked to other activists, people, who are in different cities across the country. And I'm hoping to get to interview some people maybe in other countries who are working with their communities and to really hear the story of what's happening in other queer communities around the country and around the world and how they're supporting their community and how they bring their own healing or activism or spirituality to support those people.
I've loved this about you for a long time, that you're at this intersection of queerness and spirituality. And I'm thinking there's a lot of queer people, that would include me, who are really interested in spirituality and on some kind of journey. And perhaps even if the places that they've gone haven't been homophobic, like overtly homophobic, they're kind of yearning for a queer home for their spirituality. And maybe not a queer church, but a way to explore their spirituality. So maybe I'm putting a lot of words in your mouth here, but I'm thinking of you as being kind of a leader at that intersection. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely would. Well, I don't know if I would agree that I'm a leader. I mean, maybe I'm getting there. Maybe by the time this airs and the podcast is out there, people might start seeing me as a leader. But
well, or maybe you'll be like more ready to hear that title.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I definitely notice that when I am leading groups or workshops, that there's a way in which I am leading to a certain extent, but I also really try to be mindful of that position of power and notice that I am just leading or just guiding people and supporting them through a process, and not necessarily that I'm there being a leader. I don't know. I guess I'm having a certain reaction to that word.
That word. Yeah. And that maybe I'm thinking of leader in a different way, like as just kind of shedding a light, being willing to stand up for something.
Yeah. Yeah. Forging a path, perhaps.
Yeah.
But as far as what you were saying about queer spirituality and finding a place for that, I definitely agree with you, and that there is a lot of evidence of that. You can look at something like the radical fairy community, which is a more global shamanic / pagan based spirituality communities culture, where people find their connection to spirituality just being in nature. And there are a lot of ways that people do connect to spirituality in nature. And there's a lot of people who may not really even consider them spiritual, but definitely consider themselves naturists, and that's their church. I know a lot of people who say that they go to forests or they go out in nature, and that's their church and that's their sanctuary, a place where they can feel at peace. So, and as queer people, where we haven't felt accepted by other human beings, we can go and be in nature, and nature will hold us and embrace us and support us no matter how we identify.
Yeah. Tell us about you have led workshops for queer folks that have a spiritual aspect to them. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah. So the workshops that I've led, I take the tools and practices that I've learned and use myself for my own healing and transformation through shamanic practice and guided meditation and hypnotherapy, and use them to support other queer people to take them on a journey or process of healing themselves. And so I teach them how to do the shamanic journey, which is essentially an active meditation practice to connect with, as we were talking about before, the spirits of nature or the elements of nature, or just their own internal wisdom and inner guidance or inner compass, however people want to identify, and to use that connection as a support to work through particular processes of healing and empowerment related to any of their experiences where they may have felt disempowered or judged, attacked for who they are as queer people.
In stepping into doing workshops like that and doing that kind of work as a therapist, I feel like it takes guts. I feel like it takes guts to step into something that's that different than the mainstream of therapy. What's that been like?
It's interesting as you say that, because I agree with you, but it's felt pretty easy to me. And I think that's because I gradually worked myself into that place, you know, as I said, by being involved in communities and organizations and spaces where I was a participant in that kind of setting. And then within those settings, slowly taking up roles where I was supporting, you know, other people's processes, and then just experimenting with doing that myself. And reflecting on it now, I didn't really think about it until you asked this question. But even back when I was still an intern before I got licensed, I was starting to do some of this stuff just because I wanted to try doing groups or workshops. And so I was trying to think, well, what do I know? What am I good at? What's my superpower, right? And luckily I had a supervisor who was really open to me experimenting and doing different things. And so one of the tools that I use a lot with clients, which really dovetails easily into the workshops that I do now, is mindfulness practice. And so when I was an intern, I just did a few mindfulness-based stress reduction workshops. I mean, they weren't even groups. They weren't therapy groups. It was just sort of like teaching people mindfulness and different ways of using mindfulness and tuning into the present, and, you know, did mindfulness around eating or mindfulness around emotions or mindfulness in the body. And yeah, so I guess by the time I started doing these things that feel a little bit outside the box for most therapists, it was not a big leap for me.
Excellent. I feel like there's a really important lesson there, that it's about starting and embracing your superpowers as you go, rather than waiting to take a big leap.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm reflecting on, I was listening to one of your episodes just this week with a therapist who does a lot of workshops, and he was talking about his definition of success as a willingness to try, right? And so it's just about like taking the next step and your willingness to try something. And if it doesn't work out, like figuring out what you learn from that and how to change and how to pivot there.
Yeah. And I think you have this kind of guiding motivation behind you the whole time, because I think there's this tension between not planning and planning too much. Right. So like if we plan too much, then we're not really open to what kind of possibility might come up. What might we learn that, wasn't working so well that we want to pivot. But then if we plan too little, we can feel kind of aimless, and we can end up just sort of doing what everybody else is doing. And you could never be accused of that. Like, you've definitely been driven by some kind of vision for who you want to serve and who you want to be in the world for people.
Yeah, I mean, even with these workshops that I've facilitated so far, I do have the whole workshop completely planned out, and there's definitely a path that we take. But with each class, there's been at least one, not a hiccup, but people are not quite moving all together at the same pace. And so I have to slow down, or I have to shift something, or we have to just do something again, right? Maybe, the meditation that we did that one time, people didn't quite get what I was saying, or they didn't quite get to where I wanted them to go. And so it's about just being with what is and going from there and just taking them through the process the best that I can.
Oh, I think that's really important advice for anybody running any kind of program or workshop, to have a total plan ready and then to be not freak out when it doesn't exactly work the way you thought, and not even like to totally anticipate that.
Mm-hmm.
The way you just said, you've got something ready and then you're going to follow what is needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, just bringing back the equanimity piece and non-attachment, right? Just being with what is and moving forward from there.
Yeah. So how are people finding you? How are your clients finding you?
Well, right now, I sort of have two different branches of my business. So I have my local Bay Area practice, which is mostly in-person, one-on-one or couples therapy. And most people find me through the internet, somewhere online, or through referrals, networking, that kind of thing. But for the most part, I would say at least 75% of people find me online through my website and just Googling different things. And then the other branch, which is the newer piece, which is a different website that I created to house the podcast and the workshops, and then also has coaching involved. So the idea is that that website is more national, not local. So that website's really new. So hopefully people will be finding that website more as the podcast grows. And the idea is that people would then find out about the workshops and can start filling more of the future workshops from there.
And so you've done something really interesting there where you had one website, just one business, and the workshops were one part of that. And then this whole vision has grown and gotten really clear around queer spirituality. And so you've kind of unattached it and created its own entity so that it can, I kind of think of it as like, so that it can really fully be what it needs to be. And so full disclosure, we have worked together, went through the superpower program. That's why I'm like so intricately educated about your business. But that it seems like for a lot of people, it's the right thing to keep one website. And I'm so often telling people that because you're going to be doing so much work on that website. You want everything to flow through that one place. But I think you really, in your case, you really made the right decision to split it off so that let's see, I'm looking at what it's called. Your new website. Remind us what it's called.
Queer Healing Journeys.
Queer Healing Journeys. Right. And that is so bold. And then that website gets to be representing this branch of your work in a way that you don't have to water down in any way. And then you still get to serve people through your therapy practice who may or may not fit into that completely.
Yeah. And the way that all happened was that I was marketing one of my workshops last fall, and I had someone reach out to me who was from Southern California who was interested in having me do the workshop down there. And that's when I started to think about, wouldn't it be cool to start doing this workshop in other places? So then it was around that time when I was just like, okay, so my website and all the SEO is just focused on San Francisco Bay Area. But if I want to start doing the workshop in other places, how am I going to navigate that as far as like SEO and Google is concerned? And, I could market it on Facebook or through social media in other places, but really thinking about expanding that. And I got excited about the idea of traveling and teaching. And I had already started toying with the idea of the podcast. And that's when I thought, well, if I do a podcast, then the podcast goes everywhere. And that would also really help me get a bigger reach. And it was at that point when I decided, I think on a group coaching call with you, or sort of brainstorming about what are the pros and cons of keeping it all on one website versus doing another. And then when I realized that if I started teaching in other states and podcasting that went everywhere, and if people wanted to work with me, then it would make more sense from just a legal perspective to shift into adding coaching, since I'm only licensed in California. And so it just made more sense to create a whole new website for all of those things to live together.
So at this point, how does your business fit together in terms of, working in your office and then balancing that with the other projects that you're doing? How are you finding that fits together in your business and your life? Like, is it hard to manage in terms of time or in terms of energy, or is that kind of flowing for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, right now, as we record this, I'm just getting started with the podcast. It hasn't launched yet.
But you've been interviewing people. So
I have,
you're in it.
I've interviewed at least 9 people, and I mean that's part of the answer to this question. Is I'm a lot busier right now than hopefully I will be by the time this airs.
Yeah,
because I wanted to get a lot of interviews sort of in the queue before I
Mm-hmm.
launched. So like last week I interviewed 5 people, and this week I'm interviewing 4 people, and
Wow.
that's a lot of interviews and time and energy in doing something new and setting it up. Whereas I imagine once everything is sort of set, I'll just be doing maybe 1 or 2 a week, at most 5 a month.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a lot more time and energy, especially with people that I don't know or don't know very well, that I have to spend time like researching about them and reading up about their work and think about what I want to ask. So, but right now I am in the office 3.5 days a week, and I see on average, I mean, it fluctuates. So probably right now, anywhere from 16 to 20 clients a week. And then I have 1 full weekday where I don't see clients, and then a half a day where I don't see clients. So and then I'm squeezing in right now the other interviews just in little pockets here and there where I can get them in, because I do that from home.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, the last week and this week has felt really busy, but generally the idea is that I will just be in the office 3.5 days a week, and then doing 1 or 2 interviews a week from home. And, that feels doable for me. So, and unlike a lot of other therapists or clinicians like yourself who has a family and kids, I don't have that. It's just me and my husband, and no pets, no kids. And I'm also really lucky that I live in San Francisco, and I can walk to my office in 15 minutes, so I don't have to worry about commute or anything like that. So I'm really privileged to have all of that.
Nice. And you're walking your talk in terms of keeping your life balanced.
Yeah, I do my best for taking care of myself, my self-care and my spiritual practice. And, it's been, as I said, it's been extra busy the last few weeks. So it's been a little bit challenging, but hopefully once the podcast is all up and running and automated and on its own, it'll be easier.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll get way easier. Like I found I used to spend something like 6 or 7 hours per episode, which sounds weird, but if you start adding up the like researching the people and also being in the middle of learning all the different things, and then, even though I don't do all the editing myself, doing pieces of that and then creating the content that goes with it, I was realizing, oh, that's like a lot of hours. So
yeah.
But now it's not taking that much. It's more like 2 to 3 total.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things I learned in the superpower group with you was to really figure out what I don't want to do with training, and to find a way to have other people do that for you. So I know that I could do the sound editing if I wanted to, but I know that it would just take way too much time to learn the software and figure it out. And so I'm having someone else do that for me.
Yeah. And it doesn't put you in your zone of genius if you're doing that. So that's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, it's a zone of interest, but it's not a zone of genius. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just because we could be good at something, it doesn't mean that's what we should be doing.
Exactly.
So Nick, what do you charge right now for sessions in your office?
So my fee is $165, and that's for couples and individuals. I don't charge different for the number of people. I just charge for the time, and that's for a regular 15-minute session. And then on the occasion, if I'm doing a longer session with a couple, or for hypnotherapy or EMDR, which sometimes needs more time, I'll do a 75 to 80-minute session. and that is 235.
Great. So some people who are listening are deciding whether the superpower program might be the right fit for them right now. Who do you think it's right for? And what do you think it can help the people it's right for do?
Well, I would say that it's probably right for a few different kinds of people. I can just speak for the kind of person I was and where I was in my business when I started, which was that I had been licensed, I guess, 2 or 3 years at that point, and had already started doing a lot of my own marketing work even before I got licensed, and was just wanting to boost my practice and wasn't really sure where to go. And I'd talked to a few other marketing coaches and other people who had worked with different coaches and was really trying to find the right program for me. And what I really liked about your program was that it was specifically designed for therapists, because there were a lot of other coaching programs out there that were for maybe healers or wellness practitioners, but they were also asking you to do things or making suggestions of things that therapists can't do.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of limitations that we have. But really just wanting to have the guidance and support of you and the community. Like that was another thing that I found really helpful, was the community, the Facebook group and the online group, and getting ideas from other clinicians and bouncing ideas. So you got to hear from lots of different people, as well as the structure that you offered and the inspiration and all of that. Yeah.
And what do you think, if it's the right person, what do you think it can help them do in their business?
I think it can help them streamline different parts of their practice that they may want to focus on. I know that you've helped other people streamline, starting a group practice or taking in interns. For me, it really helped me streamline some of my systems. I know that you're big on spreadsheets and stuff like that, and I actually really appreciate that. And I've continued to use some of those, a lot of the tracking systems. It's been helpful. That was actually one of the biggest eye openers for me, was when I started tracking client inquiries. I never thought that I had as many inquiries as I had, because I was only counting conversions. People actually came in, and I wasn't remembering people just inquiring. And so it was really helpful for me to track the information and be able to reflect on that. And I continue to track it, and it's just interesting to watch the trends over the months and over the years. And as I mentioned earlier, just really figuring out what my superpower is and what things are outside my zone of genius, and how can I either pass that work off to other people or save time and energy to not do those things. So for me, it was my bookkeeping, because I'm not a money numbers person, and it just has given me so much time and energy and even mental space to not have to worry about that, and to know that the bookkeeper is going to take care of all of that. And once a month, I get a little email from them telling me all about giving me my financial report, and that's it.
Nice.
Right?
That's dreamy.
So, yeah.
Awesome. And Nick, if you were going to time travel to the beginning of when you started your private practice, what advice would you have for the Nick of that time?
Well, as I said, when I was an intern, like at least 2 years before I got licensed, I already started creating my own website and doing my own marketing and a lot of networking. But going back to what I was just talking about, not being a money and numbers person, that continues to be one of my challenges and growing edges. And so I think that if I were to travel back in time, I would suggest that he take a class on budgets and financing and that kind of thing. Not that I've ever been in a place where, I spent too much money or anything like that, but it was never something that I got a whole lot of education in earlier in my life, and that's not something that we really teach in high school or anything like that. At least they didn't when I was in school. I don't know if they do now. But to just get a better grasp on money and finances and budgeting. And I think that would help me through the process of being in private practice.
Awesome. So, what is the very best place for therapists to find you and throw compliments at you?
Yeah. So as I said, I have two websites, and the one for the local practice, psychotherapy practice, is holistictherapysf.com. And then I also have my second website, which is queerhealingjourneys.com. And that's the website that holds the podcast and the teaching and the holistic coaching. Or if they just want to go to the podcast, they could go to thequeerspirit.com. And I'm also on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, those kinds of things. But they can find those links on the website as well.
So, Nick, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking to you about your journey.
Thanks for having me. I appreciated it.
Thanks for listening. Is this you? Your goal is to fill your practice with more full fee clients. Perhaps all your sliding scale or insurance slots are full, and you've figured out that with 5 or 10 more full fee clients, your business would be way better off. Join my free 5-day challenge starting Monday, September 10th. It kicks off with a live online workshop on Monday, September 10th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. I'll walk you through how to bring in your next 5 to 10 full fee clients, and then you'll get 5 short daily assignments to get you taking the right actions. I would love to have you join us. Go to coachingwithannie.com/podcast/73 and sign up. That's coachingwithannie.com/podcast/73. I will see you next week. I kind of stumbled over that last part, so I'm going to do it again. I said, it's been a pleasure talking to you.